right. What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Tahir Johnson. I'm back with another week of the Cannabis Diversity Report. And I've got my homegirl, Margeaux Bruner, in the building. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. For everybody out there, Margeaux is the head of compliance and diversity and inclusion at Red, White, and Bloom. Margeaux, but she's had a long history in the industry and multiple skill sets and multiple titles. So I'm excited to have her on here and talk about her journey and drop some knowledge on us. So Margeaux, tell us a little bit about you, what you're doing and how you got in the industry.
Currently I am the director of compliance and diversity inclusion at Red, White, and Bloom, which is really exciting. I am also a board of director member of Minority Cannabis Business Association. Like you said, my track record runs really, really long. Like I'm like Thor. I have like I've been in all the organizations throughout history, but most recently, I was the former political director for the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, which is an allied partner to NCIA. So we're at a state trade association, and you guys are doing it at the federal level. In this space, I've also been a member of, in the state of Michigan, our Attorney General's Marijuana Policy Work Group. I had a previous appointment by Governor Snyder on the Impaired Driving Committee. So I did a 13-month commission with a couple of research doctors, physicians, and also the state police, their own toxicologists. We did a 13-month study on what is the per se limit. The state of Michigan opted to not determine a per limit as far as the string. I also was part of the adult use campaign that brought Proposal 1, which was the coalition to regulate marijuana like alcohol, that brought adult use legalization to the state of Michigan, and a few other things, but that in short.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's a really long track record and history of not only lobbying, but also policy, and even seeing approval of not only legalization, but also adult use, like transition. What do you think is the most important thing that you've learned about getting legalization done? Like, as we have a number of states with legalization on the ballot this year, like what are something that people that are advocates and like different things in those states how should they be approaching this?
Well, I think hindsight gives me a lot of wisdom. And if there's anything that you want or think should be included, definitely try to bring together grassroots groups of people to put that into policy before it becomes policy, because adding after it's been created can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Also, to stay engaged and to follow what is happening, because it changes bit by bit by bit. I don't know. I have like so much hindsight on the way things happen with legalization in the state of Michigan. Another key factor is if you are part of bringing legalization, sometimes it depends on how it's adopted in your state. Ours was adopted through ballot initiative. So a group of people came together, they wrote an initiative, they collected signatures, they put it on the ballot, and people voted for it in the state of Michigan. Like our House of Representatives and Senate did not actually create it themselves. But the way that an ordinance is adopted and the way that attorneys interpret it after, completely different, sometimes night and day. Like we interpret, like we felt like we knew it inside and out, and then it passed, and then the attorneys got to it, and the meetings became slightly different than what we would have anticipated. Not in a negative way. It just was interesting to see the process. Like, for example, in the state of Michigan, we're pretty liberal here. Under our caregiver program, you can grow up to 72 plants with just, basically applying to the state of Michigan. It's not a license. You're licensed, but it's not like a seed to sale license, and you can sell to yourself, and you can grow 12 plants for yourself. You can grow 12 plants for all of your patients, so 72 in total. And then our adult use brought 12 plants, where you could just have 12 plants under adult use in your house with no license, no anything, just 12 plants per house. And so we thought that was either or, like either you can have the 72 or you can have the 12. But the attorney was like, no, you can have 84. You're like, wow, like, we didn't expect that. So sometimes the changes are definitely good.
Yeah, I mean, and that really is that's interesting, because that actually gives in Michigan an opportunity, it sounds like, for more people to have participation in the market. So with that being said, does that create opportunities for, like, what are they able to do with that cannabis that they're able to grow? Are they only able to consume it, or are they able to sell it?
Now that's where it gets really tricky. So for a long time, when I say a long time, it was an opportunity for people to participate really on the ground floor level, because the laws weren't firm, but because the laws weren't firm, some people were kind of hesitant to participate also, because there was not, a lot of direction on what, should or should not go. So in 2008, we adopt our compassion program that allows you to grow for your patients. And then around 2011, dispensaries just popped up. Like, there was no writing in the books that said dispensaries can, would, should exist. So some dispensaries thrived, and then some people went to jail. It just really depended on the municipality. But the product that was in all of those dispensaries was being grown and provided by craft growers. So the state of Michigan does have a ton of craft growers, a ton of people who, are very well versed in cultivating, really high quality flower. And then around 2016, we adopted our seed to sale program. And because the program was bottom heavy as far as the supply chain, like we had a ton of dispensaries and we were just starting to license cultivation. And that meant they had to do a build out, they have to grow the plants, they got to do all sorts of things. Our market was out of sync. And so they continued to allow the caregivers to supply the product. And then at one point they tried to stop it, and that lasted like 10 days because the quality of product that was on the shelf, the prices went sky high. Like, there was no normalization in our market. Now things have changed. As of October 1st, cultivators will no longer be able to sell into the system. So what was actually an avenue for a lot of people is actually a door that is potentially closing. And also throughout that process, there were some complexities. Like, at first they just took the product, they test it for basic things, and you sign an attestation saying, I know that this product wasn't tested for ABC. But now that they've gone full scale, seed to sale, compliance is tested for like a bazillion things. And it became more difficult to get the flower through, even if it wasn't necessarily poor quality. Just small things like being, a fraction of a % off would be able to, eliminate your product from hitting the shelves. So now we're starting to see some evolution. Like, some people who couldn't get a cannabis license have a brand or a brand name, and they're selling and licensing that to the licensed cultivators. So we're maybe like in phase 2 or 3 of the evolution of our market right now.
Right. And so when you look at the process of being able to make sure that, like, a municipality can create fair, equitable, like, laws, they're building a program. I know that, like you said, you have your role with the MCBA, and of course you guys have the model ordinance and even like the new model state bills. Could you talk a little bit about like some of the key things that are like things that municipalities should be looking at putting in place, like, to create an equitable industry?
I think that, and I recently did participate in an ordinance, a local municipal ordinance, and I have participated in several, but more heavily in this one most recently. And the one thing about it is that, kind of because I've been in the industry for a while now, like, to me, maybe 4 years is not a long time in most industries, but here is like forever. And one thing about it is that it's almost like cherry picking. Like I can give you a model ordinance that has like 100 great things on it, and some things will work really well in one municipality and others not. So you kind of have to cherry pick what a particular municipality, has the appetite to handle, how rooted in justice and equity is a particular municipality. What are the demands of the citizens in that particular municipality? Are the people that are asking to participate in the industry and they don't know how? So it really varies from place to place. The one thing that I have found in my own home state that is the most complicated is that it was a program that wasn't funded. So because there wasn't funding, all of the work and all of the messaging has to come from the state of Michigan. And sometimes there's a disconnect there. So there was a road show that went on and it explained how to do a license and how to participate in this program. But in order for you to find out, you had to be on the state of Michigan's marijuana regulatory agency mailing list, which most people weren't. And then the programs were held around 10 a.m. in the daytime when a lot of people were in day jobs. So they just didn't know. And then when the people did physically show up, I went to maybe 6 or more in my state in different places. And I would talk to the people after, like, how much do you think it costs to get a license? And most people would say like $40,000 or $50,000, which is way below the cost of getting a license. But they understood it because the state presented in a very bureaucratic way. Like they covered all of the bases, but they were presenting in a way that you don't traditionally present to entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are like, they're calculating the whole time, like, how much money do I need for this? How much money do I need for this? How much money do I need for that? So people weren't able to actually add up the cost of compliance. So if I'm presenting and I tell you like, oh, you need a fire and safety plan, you're like, okay, I need a fire and safety plan. Like I need a $30,000 for a fire plan. So, I mean, they just didn't know all of the things were going to have such, a high cost collectively. And even with that being the case, I mean, that applies to any cannabis company. Access to funding and things of that nature were a little bit complicated because this is a really heavily regulated industry. And in order for most people who go through the process relatively smoothly, they hire a multitude of experts. You hire a CPA, you hire an attorney, you hire an architect, you hire a lobbyist. So you're not walking the walk yourself. And I don't think that people understood that it was like a layer cake and they were going to need all of those professionals who sometimes come at a premium price.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because I know you have all that experience, working on that side, like the legislative side, and now you've kind of taken it and transitioned to like the private industry side. Like, what's it, talk a little bit more about like what you do at Red, White, and Bloom and what it's like leading diversity, like equity and inclusion, and now like taking those skills to work on compliance internally with what you do there.
Well, one is what I always wanted to do. I did the other things because, well, maybe I should take a little bit back to the beginning. So yeah. I was a project manager before I came to the cannabis industry. And I'm in Michigan. I worked in the automotive industry. I worked for one of the big 3 automotive companies in benchmarking. And I was like so super bored there. Like, and I saw an episode of Weed a Kid. And they were talking about the Mary Janes. And that was the first time I saw women grow featured. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I remember the show saying like, this was one of the first industries where there were more women on par to be C-suite executives. And I worked in a really male dominated industry before. So I was like, maybe this will be kind of interesting. And I went to work and I bought a ticket to Denver because Michigan was legal, but it wasn't legal in the form that I knew was going to happen in the future. So I needed to see an advanced market. So I went to Denver. I had absolutely no idea what to do, where to go. I met people on LinkedIn. I signed up for a bunch of meetup things. And one of the events that I signed up for was resume writing in the cannabis industry, because I did resume writing at the time on the side. And I was like, maybe it'll be a random skill that I could pick up along the way. And I went to a meeting And it was like virtually like who's who in Denver. And I met Khadijah Adams. She's the first African-American woman I ever met in cannabis. I met her the first time I touched down in Denver. So like the hand of God just like came down.
In Denver and met Khadijah Adams.
Right. I just met her, and like I didn't even know like who a lot of the people were at that time. Like they became like, you know, my friends and colleagues and associates in the industry after that. But it just was almost like my path was kind of guided. And also in going there, like my mom, well, my aunt actually, she was telling my mom like, oh, you know, she went there to smoke weed and blah, blah. And I was like, that's not what I came here for. And it's legal here. But I came here to see what the advanced market looked like. And I remember I came back from Denver and I told my mother, I was like, I'm going to work in the cannabis industry. And she was like, I have no idea what that means, Margeaux, or what you are even talking about here. And I was like, listen, I promise I won't go to jail and I'm not going to embarrass you. Okay. and those were my two tenets at the particular time. And then I came back to Michigan. And I was like, well, where does that tribe exist in Michigan? Like, where is a group of people who are working on legalization or have some advanced knowledge of the industry in some capacity? And I happened to be at the very first launch of the Metro Detroit chapter of Women Grow. And then I went on to be the market leader for Women Grow. And so Women Grow, especially at that point in time, there was like 35 chapters. It was an opportunity to get to know so many people and to grow your network exponentially. So I had the opportunity to kind of do that, you know, quite some time ago, and it just grew and grew and grew from there. And then I just kind of like followed the white rabbit. Like the path that I followed was not necessarily the path that I set for myself. It was that I just have a model, like I never say no to an opportunity. I just try something, and then if I don't like it, I could quit after. And so as opportunities presented themselves to me, like I followed the path of policy and legislation because it was just extremely interesting to me. And it was in total contrast with my former position where I had kind of like tapped out on just being, you know, interested in it. And I just learned a ton in a very short period of time. I met a lot of people, and I saw the industry grow. I saw the industry evolve. And so now that I am in the position that I am in with Red, White, and Bloom, it's just kind of like a continuation of that path. Like maybe around this time last year, I joined NCIA State Regulation Committee. I'm still state regulations. Like I'm slightly obsessed with state regulation and interstate commerce just because of my history with logistics and automotive. So it marries together. And the compliance portion comes from both sides. It comes from number one, actually knowing the written laws, but also having an industry awareness because this is a very new industry where in some instances, we're following, you know, the path that was given to us as far as law, but we're also evolving and creating ourselves as far as what are the norms, what are the expectations. And so it's really exciting to get to do it at this scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in Michigan there, what do you see as like the future, like of the cannabis industry or like in the Midwest in general, like as the market develops?
Number one, more brands are starting to enter into the market. You're getting more savvy consumption expectations. That's one thing about cannabis, especially when it was just in the traditional market. Like you kind of got what you got and you didn't always know what it was. Like you didn't know if you were going to feel uplifted and want to fold some clothes, or are you going to just have couch lock? So I think that people have an expectation of wanting to know what their experience is going to be when they consume something. Like you don't want to drink a beer and have the effects of gin or tequila because that's not what you expected. So the expectation is rising there. And then also, now this one is just like a personal pet peeve of mine. Like in Michigan, like because I travel, like I love pre-packed cannabis. Like I don't like somebody to like open up a glass in front of me and like touch it, or it's like food. Like I don't want you to have any contact with my product. So I think that the next evolution also is going to be pre-pack and also sustainability, because we still use a lot of plastic here.
And I wanted you to go back a little bit to something you talked about a little bit earlier, right? And you mentioned kind of like that stigma and how you had to explain to your mom, like when you were coming into the cannabis industry. And I know that that's something you and I talked about. And I know that's also like, that's something that can be a challenge, you know, for sometimes for people that want to approach the industry, but like there's opportunities for professional positions, you know, like you, right? What do you like, what type of advice do you have for people out there to like really kind of understand, like unpacking and breaking down that stigma around cannabis?
Well, there is stigma, and especially in different communities, there's more stigma than other. And sometimes it's just fear, like fear of people going to jail or things of that nature. It was a little bit different for me because I told my mother first, and she's the most judgmental person I know. So like once I crossed the threshold of my mother,
it's cool. It don't matter what you say.
So once I crossed my mom, you know, everybody is kind of a little bit secondary underneath that. But it was really interesting because my mom is a retired teacher and she knows tons of people, tons of teachers, like all throughout Metro Detroit. Both my parents were teachers. And I was at an event for the AARP. And I was presenting, and my fifth grade teacher was there. And my fifth grade teacher and my mom are friends. And like, my mom knew I was there too. But it was really interesting because just because of the way that I present, everyone was not open to the concept of legalization. And there was a lot of misinformation coming from the opposition that adult use legalization was bad and it was dangerous. And this was the return of the crack epidemic. And this is crack weed. And a lot of people didn't understand that there's no intrinsic difference between recreational and medical, other than do you need an ID or a medical card, and taxation. The cannabis itself is pretty much the exact same. Right. So being able to explain that to communities of color, especially older people who just did not know what this meant and what to expect from this. Because usually when I would come to sign in as a speaker, they would always think I was like anti-cannabis. And when they would see that I was like the person that was proposal one, they were like, you know, we didn't expect that from you. But pretty much once I told my mother, you know, that was a wrap. I had a few other things. Like one time I was doing some work last year for National Expungement Week. And I was on the local news and I went to pick my daughter up from preschool, and the preschool lady was like, I think I saw you. But, you know, you get all sorts of reactions. Like it's not usually negative. Like usually it's the polar opposite. Like I spoke last year at the Jewish Community Center, and maybe 2 weeks before I was coming to speak, they called me and asked me, was I gonna bring some edibles? And I was like, no. Like,
I'm not a producer.
I was like, I'm just coming with information, you know, about
that's hilarious.
Where to go. And then I came to speak, and when I showed up, like they were still like maybe they thought I was joking, like they really expected me to have the edibles, and they were highly disappointed that I did not have the edibles when I got there. So
hilarious.
It's not as difficult as you think. It is a legitimate industry. For anyone who says, you know, the complexities of federal legalization are sometimes difficult to explain, but understand that the federal government is taxing cannabis at the highest rate possible through 280E laws. So the federal government is not as opposed to cannabis as you might think, as long as they get their taxation. But there are complexities in that it is a Schedule I drug. So you just have to kind of meet people where they are and explain what it is. But I'm not really terribly worried about the stigma itself.
And I know that you also have don't you have a speaking engagement coming up soon, right?
Tomorrow I speak for the International Cannabis Bar Association, and we're speaking on race and social equity. It has a panel of, you know, a multitude of people that are in the cannabis industry. On my particular panel, I'm with Yvette McDowell. I know Shanita Penny is presenting. Kat Packer is presenting. Pretty much a who's who.
Sounds like a dope panel.
Yeah.
Sounds like a dope panel.
You know, yeah. Shalene Title is presenting, a number of us, and we're kind of broken into segments. So we're presenting to a different audience. You know, these are people who are either interested in law or potentially seeking continuing law education credits. So we're broken into different segments, and my segment is the past. And the one thing about this event is that we scheduled this like before the pandemic. It was supposed to be in San Francisco with you guys in June, and then that got moved to October, and now everything is virtual. But it was interesting to have the knowledge that I was going to be presenting on some of the issues from the past that have led to some of the policies that exist right now today. Some of them surround cannabis, and to go through the pandemic and all the unrest that has happened throughout the pandemic, with the knowledge that I'm going to be presenting to people who are going to be the future lawyers and judges and lobbyists, you know, and consultants, et cetera, of the future in this industry. So I'm really excited to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you say the unrest, I think it's always important for us to like acknowledge the connection between like the war on drugs, like the history of the oppression of people of color, and like, you know, the cannabis industry, right? We have a whole industry where people are making billions of dollars, but these same things still happen in our communities. You know, what do you think about the responsibility like that the cannabis industry has to like be, you know, to make sure that people of color have opportunities, and what are some of the things that, you know, that the industry can do?
Well, I believe that the industry itself definitely has a responsibility, but I think that it's a really narrow scope to focus exclusively on this industry, because there are a number of complexities that lie outside of this industry and the ability of the industry to control that play a factor in so many of those things. I think that for me, the one thing that I'm really excited about in the state of Michigan is that I'm going to have the opportunity to do a lot of diverse hiring, and I'm going to be able to hire people that had previous cannabis convictions. Under our medical law, you couldn't have any criminal record whatsoever. So you couldn't become a bud tender if you had, you know, even very small minor infractions. So I am excited to be able to include people at that level. And I think it's important to understand that it's not exclusively cannabis. Like, it is the fabric kind of this country, and understand it from that perspective, that there are multiple tiers here, and that the industry has a responsibility, but the lift is for everybody. It's not just us. It's about inclusion. It's about economic empowerment. It's about hiring people. It's about making people aware of the laws, because that was a main thing that I encountered when I would go out and speak to people. They would say, well, we don't understand what happened. Like, one day it was illegal, and the next minute there was a dispensary at the corner of my house. So there was a lack of information and inclusion, and just explaining to people what, you know, this industry is in some of their neighborhoods, explaining that there is no difference between, you know, medical cannabis and adult use cannabis, and that it should be used responsibly, but you're not going to see radically different outcomes from people consuming under different, what is essentially just different legal codes. But there's a lot of work for us all to do. But sometimes when you have these conversations, like in this forum, where you're talking to somebody from the industry, or you're presenting to people who want to understand the law, it's a little bit different, because it's important to understand that the things that happen are not just feelings and opinion. There were actually written laws that led to policies where people went to jail. And so when somebody's grandmother doesn't like cannabis, it's not that they don't like cannabis, it's that they are worried and that they are concerned about people going to jail, about people being incarcerated, about them themselves becoming impoverished through having to bail somebody out of jail, or like it's a lot of fear that is very genuine because of things that actually did happen. It's not just conceptual.
Yeah, and I think that is important for you to touch on, because I think a lot of times we always think about like ownership, like one portion of it, but there's also economic empowerment. There's making sure that people with records are like those records are removed and are able to get out of jail. I know you mentioned your work on National Expungement Week. Could you, for people that aren't aware about that, could you talk a little bit about National Expungement Week and what what that accomplishes and what the organization does?
Well, even beyond just National Expungement Week in general, as a concept, there are people that are in jail presently for cannabis convictions, and there are cannabis billboards on the freeway. So there is a lack of atonement for the war on drugs that is happening right now in real time. And National Expungement is a great opportunity for people to have their records expunged, to get more information. But essentially, expungement needs to be automatic for people. Like, you should not have to go to a fair to get your record expunged. You should not have to do anything other than just wake up and your record was expunged. The state of Illinois did it relatively well in that they did do automatic expungement. Code for America is a company, a nonprofit that does a lot of code work around public programs that provide those types of things. But it was for a very small possession limit in Illinois. I think it was like 3.5 grams, if I'm not mistaken. Your cannabis conviction had to be beneath that. But there needs to be atonement for all of the things that have happened. And there in some instances, there cannot be atonement. If you talk about historically the war on drugs and how it impacted certain communities, to take, a significant percentage of people and or males out of a community has an impact that you can't offset by just giving someone expungement or giving someone a job, or even in some sense ownership, because that ownership is not being held by the community at large when everyone was affected.
Man, that's a really good point, and that's something to really think about. But I will say shout out to you and what you're doing, and like you said, employment, being able to actually offer opportunities for people and jobs, especially in this industry, is, I think, something I want to applaud you and I guess your organization for. Is that something? Is that opportunity? Is that coming up soon? Or is it something that's coming down the line?
It is coming up soon. I will have the opportunity to do some mass scale hiring in the state of Michigan. And I mean, I've been at a lot of tables and I've heard a lot of conversations. So I understand the lack of diversity.
You're looking for?
I'm sorry?
Any specific skill sets you're looking for?
Well, it depends on the positions. Like, I personally, so I had a friend who had a dispensary a long time ago. My friend, his name is Earl Carruthers. He had, a really impactful case in the state of Michigan. He's an African-American man. He was the first African-American dispensary owner in the state of Michigan. And he had a case that went to the Michigan State Supreme Court, long story short, and he won. But at one point, I was able to, observe a little bit in his dispensary. And I was like, I just want to come in. I want to sit on the opposite side of the counter, and I just want to observe people. And I want to observe how they interact with customers and things of that nature. And I do think, as far as certain skill sets, I think that people who have accounting or bookkeeping backgrounds work really, really well in compliance and seed to sale related industries. I also think that people who were bartenders make great budtenders as well, just because they're extremely conversational and asking, what is it that you want? What type of experience are you looking for? So I think that there are tons of skill sets that work differently in different facets of the cannabis industry. I think that if you are looking at horticulture and you haven't been in cultivation before, but you have some previous experience on an assembly line or in industrial work, I think that they go well together. But I think that the sky is the limit. This industry needs a lot of things.
Yeah, they do. And where are some of the places where, people can start off to learn? Like, where did you start off when you first wanted to go? I know you mentioned some of the organizations, but are there any other good sources of information?
It depends on what you want to do in this industry, but I will say that the very best thing that you can do for yourself is to be in the room where the conversation is being had, because it does not make it to documentation in real time. Like if we're having a discussion at NCIA, it might be in the email list, that the email blast that goes out. It might be in some of the articles, but not always. So I would definitely try to be present as many places as possible. If you see that your city is having a city council meeting and you can't physically make it, you can tune in and just hear what's going on with that particular ordinance. I think that MCBA is a great place to learn for people who want to participate in the industry or might already be owners and or operators in some phase of their business who want additional support. We got a business boot camp that is happening really soon for people, and there was a process. The process closed, I believe it was last week, but we were accepting applications for people to get a number of wraparound services, business valuation, taxation, and other services, business planning. I think NCIA is great. I mean, I know that I have gone, through the camp with NCIA. I've presented multiple webinars in Michigan. I presented in Michigan, and also I presented nationally. Like it allowed me to make a name for myself in a lot of different markets where I didn't exist before, where I have opportunities in the future, but I've already kind of seeded and rooted myself in a number of places. But I don't think that there's any one particular place. I think that it's kind of an industry that once you're interested in it, like you're fully interested in it, and you absorb knowledge and information from tons of different places.
Mm-hmm. And I think, one thing you've talked about really is the importance of being politically engaged. I know last night we had the debates, but there's also like the elections on the local level, right? Like, what do you think is like the importance of being politically engaged, whether you're, whether you're a cannabis voter or just a voter or a person of color, or just, a person in general?
I think that there are a lot of people at the municipal level who don't know that people in their communities want to participate. And the industry seems so big and removed from them that there's a fear of outside people, but there's a lack of understanding that people in this community might want jobs, they want ownership. So it's important to have conversations at a municipal level with your local city council person, because they're usually easier for you to access than other people. And your opinion means the most to them because you are their voting base. So the larger that you get, you may not be my constituent. And now you get into a situation where you've got lobbyists and other people as go-betweens. But when it comes to the municipal level, like you have the opportunity to usually have a conversation, to write a note, to send an email, to say, I'm curious. I have a medical ailment and it would be beneficial to me to be able to access, the things that help me with this particular ailment without having to travel a large expanse. Whatever your personal experience is your personal experience, and everybody's personal experience is very valid.
Mm-hmm. And is there any advice that you give for people, in business trying to like survive or trying to make it through the pandemic?
Oh, the pandemic was rough. So it was rough for a lot of people. And the thing about cannabis is that you don't always make money right away. And I think that most people don't know, think, or understand that. Like they think like it's like being a rapper. Like the day you get on, like you are on, like you got $1 million. Mm-hmm. And it's not always that way. So sometimes there is a certain amount of, I don't want to say people paying dues, but just there's a process of becoming an expert. Like you don't just wake up an expert. And I remember really early on in my journey, at that point in time, Leah Hayes was the Over Women Grow. And I remember I had a one-on-one with her, and I was telling her, like, I have like a really long standing background in supply chain and compliance. And, what does it take to be an expert in this industry? Because I came from just a mentality like where experts validate other experts. Like if you're working in an environment with like, people in purchasing and engineering, like you are your own expert in your own subject. Like how does a person become a subject matter expert in non-plant touching things in cannabis? Like that was always like kind of like a curiosity to me very early on. And she explained to me, she said, like I'm an attorney and I am an expert at being an attorney. And yes, I am an expert in cannabis law because I've studied cannabis law. It was a stepping stone to already be an attorney. So I usually tell people like to kind of start where you are. If you have a particular skill set or a job that you do or an interest, sometimes there's a way to integrate it into cannabis in some way that is enriching and invalidating and will validate, your experience in a multitude of ways. I'm really, really close with Kebra, Canon Nurse Kebra Smith.
Shout out to Kebra.
Yes, Kebra, and that's a funny story too, which I'll get to. But Kebra is a nurse, and she's a hospice nurse. So her experience as a hospice nurse makes her amazing at discussing cannabis and the benefits and the effects of that because she's so well versed in being a hospice nurse. So I think that your shine is yours. Like you never have to look at another person and say, well, what is this person doing and how do I emulate that person? Because there might be an opportunity for you to either work with that person or to just bring your own element to this particular industry.
Mm-hmm. You said it sounds like you're about to tell a funny story just a second ago.
Oh, so Kebra and I met for the first time at the Drug Policy Alliance conference in 2017 in Atlanta. And like we had a similar mentor, Patrice Bettison Clark. And so like I met her, but I didn't really know her. Like it was like, hi, we were at the table. And then the next time I met Kebra was at Women Grow in Denver. We were both market leaders. I was Michigan and she's in Connecticut. And we both had on really bright orange dresses. And so like whenever we passed each other, we'd be like, hey girl, but I did not know her then either. Like I talked to her very briefly at an M4MM event that was happening after. I didn't really have a chance to kick it with her like that. And then the next time I talked to Kebra called me and she was like, do you live in Michigan? And I was like, yeah. She's like, do you know a hospital called Oakwood Hospital? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, what? Where is this going? And Kebra was traveling from Connecticut to Las Vegas, and she got sick on the plane, and her plane came down in Michigan. Mm. And they had to give her oxygen, and so they rushed her to the hospital. She had pneumonia, but it wasn't a condition where they were going to hospitalize. So they were releasing her in the middle of the night in totally strange state. And so at that point, I was like, okay. Like
that's how y'all saw each other with the orange dresses, I guess.
Yeah. So she called me. She's like, I need some place to stay. And so I'm like, do I want to let somebody with pneumonia come to my house? Like, but then I'm like, she's a nurse and she's got triplets and she's has 4 kids. Like she's kept more people alive than me. And I was working on a project. So I was like, I'm not going to be here very much. I'm out the house like 12, 14 hours a day. And she came and she stayed for like 3 days until she got better. And it was the start of an amazing friendship. And I have traveled to probably 10 or more locations and or speaking engagements. Like we have, future business endeavors, but like, I just made a genuine friend on complete happenstance. So you never know who you meet here and who it's going to be, where it's going to go. Like I met you last summer. Like it hasn't been that long, but we just were in the same place so often. I met Khadijah Adams on a whim. I just bought a ticket to Denver. I found a flight for $38 round trip in Spirit from Detroit to Denver. And so you have to like physically get up and go places. Like the industry's not going to come to you. Even if you don't know a person, just go and you'll meet a person.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I hear in common with everybody that that we're talking to. Like everybody has some type of story about how they hustled. Like, they weren't just sitting around waiting saying they were going to like come and get it. And like I said, I think that there's something common that people can learn. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Like everybody's moving at the same time, but you got to stay motivated. You got to hustle. You got to work hard for it. What do you think are some of the, how do you stay motivated? What do you do? Like, what's your source of inspiration?
I just genuinely love it. Like,
Gotta love it. Yeah.
I just really genuinely love it. Like, it is watching the evolution of something that didn't exist before. Like I would have never imagined 10, maybe 15 years ago being in this industry, that there would be an industry. And just being able to see the evolution of policy and how it moves in my state and other places, like how it walks along, like what is the future of cannabis? Like, where will it grow in the future? What will the prices be in the future? Like, it's a really interesting industry to me. But I mean, it does get taxing. Like, I mean, I had a point at the beginning of the pandemic where I was like, I might not do this anymore. I might pursue another industry, just because there was a lot of uncertainty at that time. So you just got to do what you love, whether it's this or any other thing. And also you need a support team. Like, you need a group of people that you can kind of have as a sounding board or ask questions to, whether that group of people is real in person around you locally, or a friendship that you develop online. There's a lot of information in this industry that's just given absolutely freely if you just ask.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, any other like last advice you want to share for, like for women, people of color, anybody that wants to get into the cannabis industry, any last gems or jewels you want to give?
I mean, just don't ever let a person steal your shine or tell you what you can or can't do, or where you can or cannot be, because the world is your oyster. It's nothing you can't have.
Yeah, you can break those expectations. Just because nobody else has done it before you doesn't mean you can't do it, right?
Absolutely.
That's real. Well, Margeaux, it's always
you're put here to do. That might be what you specifically are put here to do.
Yeah. And it's crazy because my memory showed me we were like a year ago. I was in Michigan, literally like a year ago today, with you hanging out in Michigan. So it's crazy. We haven't got to see each other because of the pandemic, but I'm looking forward to catching up when the world's back open.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon, homie.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.